the takeoff. So I think the congratulations should really go to Ben Bernanke and his committee. I had the privilege of serving on that committee, but it obviously ignited a rally that has continued to this day, with some toing and froing at the very end.
But really, since the end of QE3 back in 2014, it hasn't been quite as robust. I know you've warned about the efficacy of the last QE.
Right. I voted against QE3.
But do you think that central banks still have the power behind the stock market?
I think that power is running its course. I like to say that we injected cocaine and heroin into the system, and now we're maintaining our Ritalin. How's that?
You know how
do you come back to that one? But no, seriously, central banks, they did more than enough. And unfortunately, fiscal policy never followed through. And that's what everybody's waiting for. But this has been a hell of a rally. And companies have taken advantage of it to reposition themselves and buck up their bottom lines, their returns on shareholders. And
but are you surprised that it hasn't really had as much of the desired effect in the real economy? I mean, part of the aim of QE, right, was to stimulate asset prices,
create a wealth effect, which would then go down to the middle income categories. It hasn't worked as effectively, and it took longer. In this 7-year cycle, we're now getting to a point where unemployment has come down. We're seeing some wage price increases, which is good, not bad. Inflation is coming up, according to the Dallas Fed trim mean. It's now 1.7%. The last numbers was 1.9, so we're getting closer to 2%. It just took longer, and it took longer because we have absolutely feckless fiscal authorities, the Congress and the President of the United States. How's that for a little opinion?
We always count on you for it, Richard.
The reason that you catch people's attention is because you say explicitly, you say in words, what they had assumed that the Federal Reserve was doing.
Right.
When you say we injected cocaine and heroin into the system, did you, within those conversations, say, let's inflate the stock market explicitly?
There was a discussion about the cost benefits of QE, and the major objective was to create a wealth effect. So we drove rates to zero. We actually drove, if you flatten the yield curve, interest rates to the lowest yields in 239 years of history. When you do that, what you do is you change the way you discount future cash flows and future earnings. The market took off the first week of March 2009 when we made it very clear we had already doubled the size of our balance sheet and we were going to do more. And that was the tripwire, or at least the ignition of this great stock market rally, in addition to the fact that rates had already been cut to zero at the end of the year before, December of 2008. Which, by the way, I did vote for, despite what people like to say.
We spoke to you, I think it was at the end of January, and at that time the markets were falling, and I asked you then whether if the markets fell heavily, whether you would take responsibility for that, or whether the Fed should take responsibility for that. Now that you've had a couple of months to think about that, how do you feel? Is there a symmetry to responsibility from the Fed, do you think?
I think there's a disconnect between what markets are doing and what the real economy is doing. The real economy is actually doing quite well this late in the cycle.
Right. So this is the second disconnect. You connected the first, and now it's happened again.
That's correct. And I think we're going to have a payback for having levitated markets, all tradable markets. Look at where cap rates are on real estate. Incredibly low. So in my book, having been a market operator, and I was the only former market operator on the FOMC, I'm not a PhD economist. I'm very proud of that, by the way. I come from a different background, money market background. But there's always going to be a payback and regression to the mean. And
so where does the mean
still at this point?
Where does the mean lie? What is the magnitude of the payback in your view? Give us some idea.
I have no idea, but I will say that I warned my colleagues at the meetings that we would have something like a 20 to 30% correction. And don't go wobbly. The real issue is, does it impact the real economy if it occurs, like it did in 1907 and 1937 and 1929, or does it not, like it didn't in 1962 and 1987?
So once you've created the wealth effect, if you're concerned about where the economy might be going, what do you do with that wealth effect? Do you have to protect the market at these levels if you don't want the economy to tip back? I mean, how does the thinking...
I'm not on the FOMC any longer.
No, but how do you think they think?
Will financial instability, if you want to call it that, infect the economy, or will it be a passing phenomenon like it was in the crash of '87 or like it was in 1962?
And do you ultimately, which is the question, have to underwrite that? Do you have to go, okay, that's enough now?
I think that's a reckless thing to do.
What about negative interest rates?
Never going to happen in the United States.
Are you surprised to see the reaction to them in Japan?
By the people? No. If you go into a Japanese bank, you'll see it posted as your return on savings is 0.00001. I don't even know why they put the 1 there, because it's 5 units to the right or 6 units to the right. I think the insurance industry, the money market funds, community banks that are stretched on interest margins, regional banks, the big banks, and very, very importantly, I think the politicians, you can just imagine the demagogues like Trump saying, and you want to take money away from the people, want negative interest rates to finance this government? I don't see this happening in the United States. And then there's one last thing. There's a real question about the efficacy and how this actually works. We haven't seen it work in Japan. There's a question mark about Europe. And until it's proven out, I think you just be going further out the gangplank of monetary accommodation with questionable results.
So you would favor more QE over negative rates in the U.S. if we
I wouldn't favor any more QE either. I think all the bullets have been shot. You can give rates back. I would favor a couple more moves before we get into the heat of the election season. And then if we slip backwards, you have something to give.
It was a pleasure having you, especially on a day like today. As always, Richard Fisher, the former president of the Dallas Federal Reserve.
Markets heading back to the flat.